You don't expect to hear footsteps around your barn at midnight unless you're being robbed or, apparently, harassed by your homeowners association. I live in a semi-rural neighborhood outside of Durham. It's one of those communities that got swallowed by HOA madness after a developer sold the lots and a bunch of retired busybodies moved in. I've got 5 acres, a modest house, and a red pole barn out back where I restore motorcycles. Nothing flashy, nothing illegal. But apparently, it's too industrial looking for the HOA's queen bee, Deborah Glass. Now, Deborah's the kind of woman who thinks her clipboard is a badge and her word is law. Platinum blonde bob, floral blouses, and enough perfume to knock out a raccoon. She's been on my case for months over things like barn color non-compliance and unauthorized landscaping. I've ignored her because my barn was built before the HOA was even formed. It's grandfathered in. My lawyer confirmed it. But last Thursday night, I finally caught her in the act. I've been getting weird vibes all week. The driveway motion light kept tripping even when no one was there. My tools inside the barn were slightly moved. I figured it could be a possum or maybe a nosy neighbor. So I installed motion-activated cameras, 3 of them. One on the barn door, one overlooking the pasture, and one inside the barn itself. That night, just after midnight, my phone buzzed. Motion alert. I opened the app and froze. There they were, 2 figures creeping around my barn with flashlights. One of them in a damn cardigan. I threw on jeans, grabbed my flashlight, and walked out slow. Quiet. I didn't want to spook them. Not yet. I hung back behind the pine trees and watched them circle the barn. The taller one, a man I didn't recognize, was fumbling with a measuring tape. The shorter one, Deborah. Her clunky sandals, big white purse, and that unmistakable helmet of a haircut gave her away. "Get the east side measurements," she whispered. "We'll document the overhang violation tonight and file the citation first thing tomorrow." I nearly laughed. Midnight barn inspections? These people were nuts. But when she pulled out a phone and started filming the barn interior through the window, I'd had enough. "Enjoying the trespassing tour?" I called out, stepping into the floodlights beam. They both froze. Deborah squealed and dropped her phone. The guy, mid-50s, balding, maybe her new HOA lapdog, stumbled backward into a rake I'd left leaned against the wall. Classic. Zayden Rourke. Deborah snapped, trying to regain control like she'd caught me instead of the other way around. "This is a routine architectural compliance inspection. At midnight? On private property?" I waved my phone at her. "Smile for the cameras. You're both being recorded." "And you just broke about 3 laws." She opened her mouth, then shut it. "It was locked," I added. "You cut the chain, didn't you?" Deborah flushed. The guy looked like he wanted to melt into the dirt. "You're going to regret threatening the HOA," she hissed. "Nah," I said, turning to head back to the house. "You're the one who's going to regret breaking and entering." By the time I got inside, I'd already emailed the footage to my lawyer and the county sheriff's office. By the time the sun came up, the sheriff's deputy had already sat on my porch, sipping the coffee I'd offered him while watching the footage play on my laptop. Deputy Keener was the kind of man who didn't say much unless it needed saying. After watching Deborah and her sidekick snap photos through my barn window and step across clearly posted no trespassing signs, he leaned back and rubbed his jaw. "Yeah," he said finally. "That's going to be a problem for them." He took a few stills from the footage using a flash drive I provided, then asked to walk the property. I showed him the cut chain on the padlock, the boot prints in the soft dirt by the pines, and the scuffed rake handle where the man had stumbled. "Do you know the guy with her?" he asked, crouching to examine a partial shoe tread. "Never seen him before," I said, "but I have a hunch he's on the architectural committee." Deborah's been stacking it with people who will rubber stamp whatever she wants. Keener stood, eyes narrowing. "Well, that's not going to save him." He took my statement, logged the evidence, and said someone from the county prosecutor's office would reach out soon. As he walked back to his cruiser, I watched him jot something into a notebook. He paused, looked back once at the barn, then drove off. The next day, things shifted. Deborah didn't show for her usual morning patrol. No little white Prius creeping past my driveway. No clipboard bouncing at her side. Instead, a handwritten note appeared on my mailbox, tucked into a plastic sleeve. It wasn't signed, but I recognized the loopy cursive. "You've made a mistake. This isn't over." I handed it to Keener when he came back later that afternoon. He didn't say anything this time. Just nodded, slid it into an evidence bag, and left. By Monday, I got the call from the assistant district attorney. Her name was Riley Greer. Sharp voice, direct questions, and zero tolerance for nonsense. "Mr. Rourke," she began, "I've reviewed the footage you submitted. We're moving forward with charges." I didn't ask what kind. I'd seen enough episodes of Law and Order to know breaking and entering, vandalism, and criminal trespass weren't light offenses, especially with cameras catching every move. "What about the HOA?" I asked. "They've been harassing half the street for months." "This isn't just about a barn. They fined people for leaving garden hoses out. One guy got cited for having a wind chime." Greer was quiet for a moment. "We've had complaints about your HOA before," she said finally. "But this is the first time we've had solid evidence tied directly to criminal activity." That night, something strange happened. I was cleaning out the carburetor on a '78 Suzuki when I heard tires crunching gravel out front. I stepped out and saw a silver SUV idling in the street. Inside, someone was taking photos of my driveway. When I walked toward them, they sped off. No plates on the front, dark tint on the back. Not subtle. I called Keener again. This time, he didn't just take notes. "We're setting up a patrol detail," he said. "You're not the only one who's been intimidated. One of your neighbors reported a drone hovering outside their bedroom window last week." On Wednesday, I got a knock at the door. It was an older woman I recognized from the far end of the road, Mrs. Halpern. She was the one who kept chickens and always wore wide-brimmed hats. She looked rattled, holding a manila folder clutched to her chest. "I heard what happened," she said. "I thought you should see this." Inside the folder were copies of meeting minutes, real ones, not the sanitized versions the HOA mailed out. She'd been on the board until last year, before resigning in frustration. The documents showed Deborah had pushed through a motion to start proactive compliance inspections on properties that hadn't officially approved new HOA bylaws. Mine was on the list. So were 6 others. The kicker? The motion had never been legally filed with the county, making it unenforceable. "Why didn't you go public with this?" I asked. "They threatened to raise our dues," she said quietly, "and said my chicken coop was in violation. They told me if I didn't step down, they'd start foreclosure proceedings." I scanned the documents, noting the lack of signatures and dates. Sloppy. Illegal. The next morning, I called Greer again. "I've got more for you," I said. She met me in person this time, along with a plainclothes investigator from the DA's office. I handed over the folder from Halpern, along with a flash drive containing digital copies. They didn't say much, but I could tell by the way the investigator's eyes moved that something had clicked. It unraveled fast after that. A subpoena was issued to the HOA board for financial records and internal communications. The county clerk's office confirmed that no updated bylaws had ever been filed, not since the original charter from over a decade ago. That meant any fines, inspections, or compliance actions had no legal standing. 2 weeks later, the man who'd been with Deborah that night was identified as Alan Price, a retired architect and recent appointee to the Architectural Review Committee. He'd also been writing anonymous complaints to the HOA's Enforcement Division, targeting homes with sheds, solar panels, or non-standard mailboxes. On a Tuesday afternoon, Deborah and Alan were both arrested. Not quietly, either. Deputy Keener and 2 other officers showed up during an HOA meeting in the community rec center, the kind where they serve stale cookies and everyone argues over mulch colors. I wasn't there, but I heard from 3 neighbors who were. Apparently, Keener walked in mid-sentence as Deborah was lecturing about fence heights. He read the charges out loud. Criminal trespass, vandalism, conspiracy to commit fraud, misuse of HOA funds, unlawful surveillance. That last one came from the drone. Someone filmed the whole thing. It made the local news that night. The fallout was immediate. The remaining board members resigned within 48 hours. A special election was called. Greer's office issued a public notice inviting residents to submit evidence for a broader investigation. Turns out, the HOA had been inflating landscaping fees and billing residents for services never rendered. A local lawn care company came forward with falsified invoices and admitted they'd been getting kickbacks to pad the numbers. By the end of the month, the HOA's corporate charter was suspended pending further review. I got a letter from the county thanking me for my cooperation. Mrs. Halpern's chickens stayed. The guy with the wind chime hung a second one out of spite. As for me, I repainted the barn not because I had to, but because I wanted it slate black, just to drive the point home. The new board? They're temporary. but they're all volunteers from the neighborhood. One's a retired judge. Another's a former city planner. None of them own a clipboard. I checked. Deputy Keener still stops by sometimes, mostly to chat and drink coffee. He says the case might lead to statewide reform on HOAs. I say I'll believe it when I see it. But for now, the barn's quiet. The cameras are still up, and the only thing creeping around at night is the neighbor's cat. I can live with that. 2 weeks after the arrests, the neighborhood was quieter but not peaceful. A vacuum had opened up where fear used to be. Without Deborah and her little regime breathing down everyone's necks, people weren't quite sure what to do with the space. Some folks planted flowers. Others started walking their dogs again without glancing over their shoulders. But there was still something unspoken hanging in the air. The county's investigation hadn't stopped with the arrests. What started as a simple trespassing case had peeled back something deeper, something that made even Deputy Keener visibly uneasy when he stopped by one morning with a clipboard that wasn't his. They found something else, he said, standing just inside the barn's side door, eyes flicking up to the rafters. Need to ask if you've ever seen anyone going in and out of Lot 12. Lot 12 was 3 streets over, a vacant parcel tucked between 2 homes. I'd always assumed it was undeveloped because of drainage issues. Turned out, the title had been transferred into the HOA's name 4 years ago under a shell LLC. The original owner? A woman who'd moved into assisted living shortly before the transfer. Her daughter had contacted the county when she saw the news about Deborah and Alan on the local station. I've never stepped foot on it, I said. Didn't even know they owned it. Keener raised an eyebrow. Neither did the county assessor's office. But we found a lockbox with HOA documents inside. Not the kind you show at meetings. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. 2 days later, Greer called again. This time, she didn't want information, she wanted help. There's a pattern, she said. The same forged signatures, the same fake LLCs, and the same internal memos all pointing to the same 3 properties being transferred illegally. We can't get a court order to seize the rest without probable cause. But if someone from the neighborhood had a reason to access those documents. She let the sentence hang. I'm not breaking into anything, I said, crossing my arms. No, she replied. But you could attend the interim board's audit committee meeting next week. They might ask for volunteers to review legacy files. If they do, and you happen to find anything, well, let's just say it would save us some paperwork. That's how I ended up sitting in a folding chair inside the HOA's temporary office, a converted model home near the entrance to the subdivision, with a cardboard box labeled Archive Box 3 on my lap and a pot of burnt coffee boiling somewhere behind me. I wasn't the only volunteer. There were 5 of us, all residents who'd had run-ins with the previous board, but hadn't fled the neighborhood entirely. One of them, a retired postal inspector named Mason, had already flagged 3 checks made out to Community Maintenance Solutions that had never cleared any known bank. What do you think they were paying for? I asked. He flipped a page. Nothing. It's a front. CMS doesn't exist outside this ledger. I ran the name through the federal registrar. It's not even a DBA. Each box told its own story. Stamped envelopes never mailed. Meeting minutes with different versions of the same date. But box 3 was different. It wasn't just records, it was a blueprint. Literally. Buried between a stack of expired vendor contracts was a site map marked up in red ink. It wasn't the original development plan. This one had addition structures that didn't exist yet. Sheds, fencing, outbuildings, all labeled with lot numbers, including mine. I turned it over and found the name, AP Designs, scribbled in the corner. Alan Price's initials. Mason leaned over. That's a site development map. He was planning something. More than planning, I said. I pointed to a line running from Lot 12 to the eastern edge of the neighborhood. It was labeled Access Road Phase 1. Mason stood up and went into the back room. When he came out, he was holding a USB drive and a yellow envelope. I found this behind the filing cabinet yesterday, he said. Didn't know what to make of it. You might now. Inside the envelope were 3 aerial photographs, high-resolution images taken from above the neighborhood at different times over the past year. They showed gradual clearing along the eastern edge. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to go unnoticed. Except it hadn't gone unnoticed. Not by everyone. I took the USB drive to Greer's office the next morning. She plugged it in and sat back as file names scrolled across the screen. Most were PDFs and scans of invoices. But one folder, labeled Phase 2, contained a set of deeds and property line adjustments, all unsigned but drafted in legal formatting. They were preparing to annex, she said. Not legally. Quietly. Annex what? Everything east of the creek. That's county land. But if they'd gotten away with it, they could have redrawn the HOA boundary, claimed jurisdiction, and started collecting dues. I stared at the screen. But they'd need consent from the owners. They were forging it, she said. We found a notary stamp that doesn't exist. It was used on at least 5 documents. That was the crack that broke the dam. With the Phase 2 folder in hand, the DA's office obtained a search warrant for Deborah's home. Inside, they found a locked cabinet containing 23 property files, each with a forged consent form and a fake notary seal. One of them included a power of attorney for a homeowner who'd passed away 6 years ago. It got worse. A forensic accountant brought in by the county traced nearly $75,000 in HOA funds to a personal account in Alan's name. The account had been used to purchase the drone equipment, several surveillance cameras, and a set of contractor tools. But the real shock came when they found an insurance policy tied to Lot 12 with Alan listed as the beneficiary. They were setting up a fraud network, Greer told me, using the HOA as a front to launder money through fake improvements, manufactured violations, and property theft. Your barn, that was just the beginning. Public outrage exploded. The local paper ran back-to-back front-page stories. A town hall meeting was held at the Civic Center, packed shoulder to shoulder with residents and reporters. I was asked to speak not because I was special, but because I caught the first thread. I kept it short. I didn't catch them because I was looking for corruption, I said. I caught them because I installed a camera to keep my tools safe. But once I saw how deep this went, I couldn't ignore it. And none of us should. Applause erupted. Not polite. Furious. Vindicated. The county filed a civil suit to dissolve the HOA's corporate status permanently. In its place, a voluntary neighborhood advisory council was proposed, strictly non-binding, with no authority over private property. Residents voted 2-1 in favor. Deborah and Alan were denied bail after prosecutors presented evidence of witness tampering. Their trial was scheduled for the fall, with additional charges pending. The third co-conspirator, a retired paralegal who'd been ghostwriting the fraudulent documents, pled guilty in exchange for cooperation. I never got a formal apology. Didn't expect one. But one morning, as I was tuning the suspension on a vintage Triumph, a kid from down the street rode up on a bike and handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing my barn, with the words "Nice Garage" written in crayon underneath. The kid smiled, then rode off. That was enough. The cameras stayed up. Not because I was worried, but because I learned something: corruption doesn't wear a mask. It wears a name tag and calls itself a volunteer. And if it ever comes creeping around again, I'll be ready. The trial began just after the first frost settled in. Courtroom B at the Durham County Courthouse filled quickly. Reporters, neighbors, and even a few former board members who had kept their heads down during the fallout. The state had brought 12 charges against Deborah Glass and Alan Price, from criminal trespass to conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. The last-minute edition of wire fraud caught both their attorneys off guard. Apparently, Alan had been using HOA funds to pay for a private consulting business he'd created under a fake name. That only came to light when the forensic team traced email threads buried in a corrupted hard drive recovered from the HOA's old office. I hadn't planned to testify initially, but Assistant DA Greer said my footage was the first domino. And the jury, as she put it, needed to understand the kind of arrogance we were dealing with. When I took the stand, I didn't dress anything up. I told them what I saw: 2 people skulking around my barn past midnight, one of them cutting a chain and trespassing on private land they had no legal authority over. I described how their inspection wasn't just unwarranted, it was terrifying. Out there in the dark, with flashlights sweeping around my tools and machines, it felt less like enforcement and more like a threat. The defense tried to paint it differently. Our clients were responding to multiple complaints from neighbors, said Deborah's attorney, a sharp-chinned man in an ill-fitting Navy suit. They believed, in good faith, that they had cause to inspect the structure. Greer didn't let him finish. Is good faith normally exercised by cutting a lock and entering private property in the middle of the night without notice or accompaniment? She asked him, holding up a photo of the broken chain. Because if so, I have several deputies who would like to disagree. The judge, a woman with a calm voice and a stare like a cold wind, allowed the footage to be played for the jury on the third day. The room was silent as Deborah's voice crackled from my security cam audio, whispering about documenting the overhang violation and filing citations. When Alan dropped his flashlight and stumbled into the rake, 2 jurors exchanged glances, but nobody laughed. The absurdity of it wasn't funny anymore, not when the entire scheme had ballooned into a web of forged deeds, stolen funds, and manipulated property lines. But it was what came next that stunned even me. The prosecution called a surprise witness, a former HOA treasurer named Raymond DeWitt, who had moved out of the neighborhood a year prior. He'd come forward after seeing the news coverage and realizing part of his signature had been cut and pasted onto documents filed months after he'd resigned. "They used scans of my old approvals," he said, throat dry, eyes darting to the defense table. "Cut and pasted my signature onto updated financial statements. I didn't know until I saw the ledger on the news." He handed over a USB drive. On it were PDFs sent to his old email address during Alan's tenure, each with altered dates and amounts. One showed a maintenance expense of $17,000 for a non-existent storm drain on Lot 9. I'd walked past that lot every day for years. It was empty, just wild thistle and gravel. That was the tipping point. Greer pivoted the case from individual misconduct to systemic abuse. By the 6th day, she was laying out what she called the HOA machine, a structure designed not to manage the neighborhood, but to extract money, silence opposition, and expand control through fear. They weren't preserving community standards, she said during closing arguments. They were building a shadow government over your homes, funded by your own dues, enforced by intimidation, and concealed by forged paperwork. It took the jury 3 hours to return a verdict. Guilty, on all counts. Deborah's face didn't change. Alan blinked slowly, like the verdict hadn't quite reached him yet. But when the judge revoked bail and ordered immediate remand, his hands started to tremble. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, Greer called a meeting of the interim council and invited me to attend, not as a witness, but as a resident with first-hand insight into what the community had been through. "I'm not running for anything," I said as soon as I walked in. "No one's asking you to," said Mason, who'd helped uncover the fake invoices. "But we need someone who actually knows how to spot a scam." We spent 2 hours going through the new charter draft. No dues without direct consent. No inspections without a signed warrant or verified complaint. No authority to alter property lines under any circumstances, not even with a vote. "Should we keep the name?" someone asked near the end. "No," said Mrs. Halpern. "Let it die with the old board." The new name, Red Pine Community Circle, was voted in unanimously. It wasn't a governing body. It was a group of volunteers offering help, resources, and communication. If someone needed a ramp installed for an aging parent, or help chasing off coyotes from the creek, they could call the circle. But no one would be knocking on their door demanding to measure their mailbox. The sentencing hearing came on a Tuesday morning, cold enough that the courthouse steps were slick with frost. I wasn't going to attend, but Greer sent me a message asking if I'd consider giving a victim impact statement. I stood before the court, hands in my jacket pockets, and spoke without notes. "I moved out here to work with my hands, not fight a war in my own backyard," I said. "But when someone tries to take what you've built, your property, your peace, even your dignity, you either stand up or get rolled over." I stood up. So did my neighbors. "And we're not going back." The judge handed down 15 years to Deborah and 12 to Alan, with eligibility for parole after 10 and 8 respectively. The paralegal who'd cut the deals walked with 3 years probation and a permanent bar from working with real estate documentation again. It didn't feel like a celebration, more like the closing of a book that had been open too long. I went home that evening and walked the property line, just to feel the cold on my face and the crunch of frost under my boots. The barn stood exactly where it always had, slate black against the dusk. I ran my hand along the side, stopping near the spot where the rake had been knocked over that night. The camera was still up, but I hadn't needed to review footage in weeks. As I was heading back inside, I noticed something tucked under a stone by the gate. A folded note. No envelope. It read, "Thanks for keeping us safe." C. I didn't know who C was. Didn't need to. Later that week, I saw the kid who'd drawn the barn picture helping his mom plant bulbs in their front yard. He waved. I waved back. And just like that, the neighborhood started being a neighborhood again. Not perfect. Not uniform, but real. The barn light stayed on that night not because I was watching for anything, but because I had an old Yamaha engine that needed tuning. And for the first time in a long while, I worked without looking over my shoulder.